Shalom from Israel. This series of lectures focuses on understanding the book of Psalms. The book of Psalms is used in Jewish liturgy, it's used in Christian liturgy, it's a holy text. It was written by King David some 3,000 years ago. And so for all of us who use it in our prayer, it's paramount to understand what we're really saying. Um, of course, it was written in Hebrew, and Hebrew is a language that's quite different from, well, any of the languages that I assume the audience of these lectures know. And so the focus here in this series of lectures is to understand what the Hebrew text is saying. And we'll discover that the Hebrew text is or has multiple meanings, and we shall see that King David, an amazing poet, and of course someone inspired very much by God, um, the multiple meanings available in Hebrew is something that he uses a lot. And so let's start at the beginning, the first verse. Ashrei ha'ish asher lo halach be'atzat reshaim. Praiseworthy is the man who did not walk in the counsel of the wicked. Uvederech chataim lo amad, and on the path of the sinful he did not stand. Uvemoshav leitzim lo yashav, and in the session of scorners he did not sit. So we have this verse, and we see right away that it consists of three parts. King David is warning, presumably he's warning decent folk, to stay away from three groups of people in order to become praiseworthy. So these three groups are the wicked, the reshaim, the sinful, the chataim, and the scorners or good-for-nothings, the leitzim. And in the structure of the verse, well, it seems that King David, just like most people, when warning someone else, you start off by warning him or her about the biggest danger. Right? Stay away from the wicked. Who are the wicked? So one of the greatest commentators of the Bible, 19th century Rabbi Meir Leibush ben Yechiel Michel, known by his initials as the Malbim, he explains that the wicked in this verse are the intentional sinners, those who they want to sin. On the second group described in this verse, the sinful, they are people who sin, but they don't want to sin. It's just that their passion, their evil inclination overcomes them, as I'm sure it does sometimes with all of us. The third group of people, the leitzim in Hebrew, as far as the Malbim is concerned, they're the good-for-nothings. They don't do anything bad, but they also don't do anything good. So they are, of course, better, so to speak, quote unquote, than those who give in to their evil inclination and sin. And of course, they're much better than the first group of people, the wicked, the reshaim, who are those who sin intentionally. And so, again, to sum up where we are right now, having read the verse at first glance, it's a threefold warning, where the first part is to not be with the wicked, the intentional sinners. The second part, not to be with those who give in to their temptations and therefore sin. And the third part, to also not hang out, so to speak, with the good-for-nothings. So it's what's in music called a diminuendo. It goes from the strongest to the least strong, in this case from the worst to the least bad. Right? The wicked, the intentional sinners, the sinful people who sin because of giving in to temptation but not because they want to, and the third part, which is, well, just people who do nothing. Also, the verbs in this verse suggests this interpretation. Because we saw, let's read the verse again. Praiseworthy is the man who did not walk in the counsel of the wicked. Walk in the first part. And on the path of the sinful, he did not stand. So we had walk, then stand, and in the third part, and in the session of scorners or good for nothings, he did not sit. So we have walk, stand, and sit. In the context of warning people about not hanging out, about not spending time with certain kinds of people in order to not get influenced, in order to not become like them, it would seem to mean that with the really bad people, the wicked, don't even walk with them. Like walking implies that, well, as I'm walking, as soon as I would realize that I'm being affected, I'm being influenced by these people, I'll just walk away. While if I'm standing still, then in order to get away, once I see that I'm being influenced, I have to start walking and then walk away. And if I'm sitting down, well, then I have to first stand up and then start walking away. So in the context of understanding this verse as being written in diminuendo, from the worst to the least bad, the verbs support such an interpretation, because King David is warning us to not even walk with the people who are the wicked, even though, so to speak, you could walk away, right? But with the least bad people, the ones who are just good for nothings, in Hebrew the leitzim, well, as long as you're not sitting in their sessions, meaning as long as you're not really spending a lot of time with them, nicht gefährlich, as they say in Yiddish, it's not so bad. Right? It makes sense if you warn someone about not hanging out with certain groups of people, with certain kinds of people. So you would say, well, look, with the really bad, don't hang out at all. With those that are slightly better, well, as long as you're not hanging out quite a lot with them. With those who are good for nothings, well, as you know, who do neither good nor bad, but they also don't do any good, so you don't learn anything good from them, at least don't sit with them a lot. Right? That would be the simple explanation of this verse, that it's a diminuendo. It goes from the most important to the least important. But now we'll see a completely different understanding, and in order to do that, we'll have to learn just a little bit about Hebrew grammar. In Hebrew grammar, the pronoun comes before the verb. Like if you want to say, I stand, so you say, ani omed. Ani, that's I. Omed, stand. I stand, ani omed. Just like in English. But in Hebrew, you can switch around the order. You can put the pronoun after the verb. You can say, omed ani. And then instead of saying, I stand, you have said, standing am I. In other words, if the verb comes first, before the pronoun, then you have underscored what the verse is saying, or what the sentence is saying. If you say, omed ani, then standing am I. You have underscored the fact that I'm standing. If you say ani omed, I stand, then well, you've told me that you're standing, but you haven't underscored it. You haven't made a point out of it. There's no exclamation point. And now let's look at the verse. We had three parts, you remember. The first part is written in the regular way. Praiseworthy is the man who, well, that's just the introduction. And then the first part, who did not walk in the counsel of the wicked, right? The pronoun, which by the way is implied here, so to speak, is before the verb, who did not walk in the counsel of the wicked. But then the second part, and on the path of sinners he did not stand. Right here we have it's stressing the point that he did not stand on the path of sinners. Uvemoshav leitzim lo yashav, and in the session of good for nothings he did not sit. So there is there's an accentuation of the verb, and so reading it this way, which basically that's reading it carefully, not just reading the verse and getting what it tells us at first glance, but reading it slowly, taking note of the nuances. We see that the verse does not speak in diminuendo. It doesn't start with the most important and then goes down in importance. It seems to be the exact opposite. It seems that the second and the third part of this verse are more accentuated than the first part. So it's a crescendo. It goes from the least to the biggest, to the most. And then that is the exact opposite to what we just said. So how would we understand this exact opposite, this other interpretation of our verse? So I would suggest that there are two kinds of people. There is the kind of people, there is a kind of people where what's most important is to not be with the really bad people. Because if you're with the really bad people, in this case the wicked, the intentional sinners, and you'll be influenced by them, well then, God forbid, you'll be like them. So at least don't hang out with them. If you hang out with those who sin because of temptation, that's slightly better. And if you hang out with those who do neither good nor bad, well then that's the best of the scenarios where you are hanging out with someone with whom you shouldn't hang out with. But there's another kind of person, the kind of person who is maybe more particular about details, maybe a person who maybe notices things more. So for him to hang out with evil people, it won't make him evil, because it's so obvious that the people that he sees, for him it's so obvious that these kinds of people are wicked, that he's not influenced. So for him, it's more important to not hang out with slightly less evil people. Because with them, well, he'll notice that they're less evil, and so he'll say to himself, nicht gefährlich, that's not so bad. These are not so bad, so the influence is less bad. But on the other hand, that means that he's allowing himself to be more influenced. So for that kind of person, the crescendo in the verse makes sense. It makes sense that it's more important for him to not hang out with the slightly less bad people, and most important, to not hang out with those people who are, well, neither good nor bad, because he'll be most susceptible to those least bad people. Because the most bad people, the evilest, so to speak, which is not correct, but let's just use that word for now. The most evil people, they won't influence him, but the least evil people, they will. And so in warning him, it would be more important for King David to point out to him not to hang out with the least evil people. And so here we see something which is quite fantastic. The double meaning, the two possible interpretations of this verse is directed very, very precisely, very exactly to the two different kinds of people that we're talking about. The kind of person who reads the verse and understands it at first glance, and then he reads on. So for him, the first interpretation is psychologically more important. Don't hang out with the really bad people. That's the most important. Also, don't hang out with the slightly less bad people, but that is, of course, less important, because if you're influenced by the slightly less evil people, well, that's better than being influenced by the really evil people. But if you don't read the verse and understand it at first glance, if you're the kind of person who's detail oriented, and you see the second interpretation that we saw, that if you look at the pronoun verb structure, then you see that the verse is not written in diminuendo. It doesn't start with the most important and goes down. It starts with the least important and goes up. If you see that when you read the verse, well, then that second interpretation is more important to you, because for you it's most important to not hang out with the least bad people, because it's with the least bad people where you have a danger of being influenced. The most bad people, the real evil ones, well, you won't be influenced because you notice details. You're very you know, your eyes are very open. You're very detail oriented. You notice what's around you. So with the most evil people, that's the least danger. They pose the least danger to you in terms of being influenced by them. And so it's a masterpiece, this verse, in that it has two possible interpretations when you read it. And if you read it in the first way, then the first interpretation, the first of the two that we explained, is the one most important to you. And if, on the other hand, you're the kind of person who reads it slowly, not at first glance, then you see the second interpretation, and then also that second interpretation is psychologically more important to you than is the first. So, masterpiece. Two meanings in one verse, and if you see the first meaning, then that's the one that's for you, and if you see the second meaning, then that's the one that's for you. And so we can just be in awe of, well, King David, of course, and be in awe of how beautiful and rich the Hebrew language is, and how important it is to understand it, and how crucial it is. And without understanding it, we're not really understanding what Psalms are saying. So I thank you for your attention, and I hope that you'll listen to the second class and the third class, and that you'll stay with us for this series of lectures. Shalom from Jerusalem, and all the best.